The dump truck backed up to my irrigation canal at 7:12 on a Tuesday morning, beeping like it had every right to be there. Vivian Klein stood beside the new HOA entrance sign with a clipboard tucked against her white blazer, watching the first load of pale construction dirt slide into the waterway my wife and I had kept open for 34 years. My green-handled shovel lay against the pump shed. Marin's shovel. The one she used every spring when the cottonwoods were still small. I walked down the bank and saw the brass tag on the old headgate before the dirt covered it. State Lateral 14B. Vivian smiled at the neighbors gathering behind her. Old farm ditches don't get to hold an entire neighborhood hostage. I looked at the canal, then at the trucks. Before I get into what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, because where I live, burying water is never just burying dirt. That canal had been there longer than every mailbox in Juniper Bend. It ran along the east side of my place outside Ontario, Oregon. A narrow cut of water bordered by rabbit brush, gravel, and 4 cottonwoods that never grew straight but never died either. In July, when the air turned white with heat and the alfalfa fields across the road looked tired enough to lie down, that canal still moved. Slow, shallow, stubborn. Like most useful things out here. My wife, Marin, used to say water had manners if people respected its path. She said it one spring morning while standing ankle-deep in mud, both hands wrapped around a green-handled shovel she had bought at the farm store because it was $5 cheaper than the good one. 34 years later, that same shovel still hung beside my pump shed, its paint rubbed thin near the neck, the handle worn smooth where her thumb used to rest, and when I set its blade against gravel it made a flat, familiar ring that sounded like dawn before the heat came up. Marin planted the cottonwoods after our first drought year together. Shade is a promise, she told me. I did not argue with her. I had already learned marriage went better when a man knew the difference between silence and surrender. The brass tag on the old headgate read, State Lateral 14B. Most people never noticed it. It was bolted low on the metal frame, stained by hard water and dust, the numbers half hidden under grass in wet years. I noticed it every time I cleared silt. Not because I needed reminding, but because old records matter. Water remembers grade. The trouble started when Juniper Bend Estates got its new HOA board. Vivian Klein introduced herself at my fence line on a Saturday morning wearing pressed jeans, a white blouse, and sunglasses too large for the dust blowing across my lane. 2 men stood behind her holding survey flags. Another man had a tablet with a development map glowing on the screen. Mr. Rowan, she said, smiling like we were already in agreement. We're finally cleaning up this entrance corridor. I looked past her. 1 orange stake stood 3 feet inside the canal bank. That's not entrance corridor, I said. That's irrigation. Her smile tightened. It may have been once, but the neighborhood has approved a beautification plan. Stone signage, native landscaping, a small water feature, something that reflects where property values are going. Behind her, one of the survey men pushed another stake into the ground. I stepped down the bank slowly and pulled it back out. Vivian watched my hand, then looked at the old canal like it had personally embarrassed her. We'll send formal notice, she said. The next morning, I found pink ribbon tied around the headgate. By Tuesday, the first paint line crossed the canal itself. The first letter arrived on thick cream paper with the Juniper Bend Estates seal printed at the top. That seal was new, the canal was not. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee cooling beside my elbow and Marin's old water notebook sitting where I always kept it. Under the phone book nobody used anymore. The letter called my canal an obsolete drainage depression. It said the feature created visual disharmony along a shared community corridor. It gave me 10 days to remove, cover, or otherwise remediate the nuisance condition. There was no statute number, no state water reference, no map recording. Just words dressed up in authority. I read it twice, then folded it back along the original crease. I had spent too many years around permits and delivery records to be impressed by official-looking sentences that never said who gave the order. So I wrote back. I asked for the recorded authority allowing the HOA to alter an active irrigation lateral. I asked for the permit number authorizing work inside the Canal bank. I asked whether the board had contacted the state engineer's office before marking the head gate. 3 questions. Certified mail. Plain paper. Vivian answered 2 days later by email. Dear Mr. Rowan, the board has broad authority to preserve community appearance and improve common interest frontage. Your continued refusal to cooperate may result in fines, contractor access, and legal recovery of costs. That was all. Broad authority. No document. On Friday afternoon, she held what she called an informal resident walkthrough near my fence. About 20 people came, most of them new owners from the subdivision, wearing clean shoes and carrying iced drinks. Vivian stood beside the canal with her clipboard and pointed toward the water like she was explaining a stain on carpet. This is exactly the kind of outdated rural remnant that prevents Juniper Bend from becoming what it should be, she said. A few people nodded. I stood on my side of the fence. She turned toward me then, letting everyone see the smile. Old farm ditches don't get to hold an entire neighborhood hostage. Nobody laughed loudly. That was worse. Somehow. They just looked away in that careful way people do when they want someone else's discomfort to be over. I could have said plenty some. I could have told them that ditch delivered lawful water before their stone mailboxes existed. I could have told them Vivian's water feature made no sense unless the old canal disappeared first. I could have told them silence was not the same thing as losing. Instead, I asked one question. Where's your approval number? Vivian blinked. Then she looked at the residents and gave a small laugh. Mr. Rowan has a habit of overcomplicating simple improvements. That evening, when the sun dropped low enough to turn the canal copper, I walked the bank again. Near the head gate, half tucked under a survey ribbon, I found a folded copy of the HOA's landscape rendering. A decorative pond sat exactly where lateral 14B entered my property. By Monday morning, the HOA had people on the canal bank. Not just Vivian this time. 2 board members stood near the entrance sign with paper cups of coffee. A private security guard leaned against a white pickup. 3 contractors unloaded plywood forms, grade lasers, and a skid steer with fresh mud on the tires. I came down from the pump shed carrying my phone, a tape measure, and Marin's green-handled shovel. Vivian saw the shovel first. Mr. Rowan, she called. I hope you're not planning to interfere with permitted work. I stopped beside the head gate. Which permit? Her mouth tightened, but only for a second. The improvement permit approved for the entrance corridor. That's not what I asked. The security guard shifted like he thought I might swing the shovel. I set it down, flat beside my boot. Blade to dirt. Handle toward me. No thread in it. Just a tool where a tool belonged. One of the contractors, a young man with sunburned ears, walked the bank with orange paint. He sprayed a line straight across the canal shelf, then checked his tablet. That grade's wrong, I said. He looked up. Vivian cut in before he could answer. The engineers have already reviewed this. I pointed to the slope. Water won't climb. That got a small laugh from one of the board members, not because it was funny, because Vivian smiled first. I didn't argue. I took photos. I photographed the orange stakes, the tire marks, the paint crossing the canal, the brass tag on the head gate, the security truck plate, and Vivian standing beside the contractor map. Years of inspection work had taught me that memory is useful, but timestamps are better. Back when I worked maintenance for the irrigation district, I had seen people lose fights they should have won because they trusted outrage more than records. A washed-out culvert, a moved fence, a gate chained by someone who swore they had permission. The land never spoke loudly. The paper did. At 10:18, the sunburned contractor stepped away from the group to take a call. His clipboard sat open on the hood of his truck. I did not touch it. I only looked. Near the bottom of the top sheet, under scope of work, one line had been highlighted in yellow. Fill and conceal existing ditch line prior to final permit inspection. Conceal. That word stayed with me. A neighbor named Glenn Harper, who had lived 2 lots down since before the HOA had a website, came up beside the fence and lowered his voice. "Caleb," he said, "they told us that pond was already approved. Did they mention the canal?" He looked at the orange paint crossing the water. "No." I took one more photo. Then I went back to the house and wrote, "Vivian, the board, and the contractor a certified letter." It was short. I identified State Lateral 14B. I stated that no work should occur inside the canal corridor without written approval from the state engineer. I included photographs. At the end, I wrote one sentence. Water remembers grade. Records remember people. By evening, the certified mail receipts were printed on my desk. By sunrise, Vivian had tied a new ribbon around the head gate. Red this time. The State Water Resources Office in Vail was built like every public building that has outlived 3 remodels and 2 promises to replace it. Low ceiling. Tan walls. Fluorescent lights that hummed when they got tired. A front counter polished smooth by elbows. Folders. And people trying not to lose land over words they did not understand. I signed in at 9:04. The woman behind the counter looked at my request form, then at me. "Lateral 14B, she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "That one's old." "So am I." She almost smiled. Her nameplate read, Mara Ellison, Regional Field Officer. Not a clerk. That mattered. She had the posture of somebody who had spent years walking ditch banks in bad boots, listening to people explain water law incorrectly. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Conveyance status, original permit, any amendment map, and anything that says who can impair it." Mara paused at that last word. Impair. That's the word I need checked. She looked at me a little longer, then took the form. "Have a seat, Mr. Rowan." The waiting area smelled like copier heat and wet cardboard. I sat under a bulletin board full of drought notices, canal rotation schedules, and one faded poster that said, "Water rights are property rights." Somebody had taped it crooked. I liked that. 20 minutes later, Mara came back carrying a gray archival folder with a blue tag on the corner. She set it down carefully. "Most people ask if a ditch is theirs," she said. "You asked if it can be impaired. I worked maintenance a long time. I can tell." Inside the folder was an amendment map dated years before Juniper Bend Estates became anything more than pasture and sagebrush. The canal was drawn in blue pencil, thin but unmistakable, bending along the east side of my land before crossing the road toward 2 older parcels south of me. Lateral 14B. There it was. Not drainage, not nuisance, not abandoned. A state-recognized irrigation conveyance. Mara turned a brittle page under a plastic sleeve. Here, she said. The sentence sat in the middle of the document, plain as fence wire. No private subdivision authority may obstruct, fill, relocate, or impair lateral 14B without written approval from the state engineer. I read it once. Then again. There are moments when anger should arrive loud, but mine did not. It came in small and cold, like water slipping under a gate. Mara pulled another sheet from the folder. "This is interesting," she said. It was an old maintenance log from 22 years earlier. My own signature was on the bottom, next to a note about clearing silt after spring runoff. Beside it, in pencil, was Marin's handwriting. First water, May 3rd, cottonwoods held. I had forgotten she wrote that there. For a second, the office went quiet around me. The light still hummed. A printer clicked somewhere behind the counter. Mara looked down at the page and gave me the kindness of not speaking. I touched the edge of the plastic sleeve. Not the paper, just the sleeve. "What happens if someone already filled part of it?" I asked. Mara's face changed. "Not dramatically. Just enough. Then they may have a permit problem," she said, "and possibly an enforcement problem." I slid Vivian's letter across the table. Then the landscape rendering. Then the photo of the contractor's highlighted work order. Mara read the word "conceal" twice. When she looked back up, her voice was flat. "Mr. Rowan, has any dirt been placed in that canal yet?" "Not yet," I said. But I knew Vivian. And I knew Red Ribbon. The trucks came at 7:12 the next morning. I heard them before I saw them. Diesel engines grinding slow down the subdivision road, backup alarms, metal tailgates rattling over washboard gravel. By the time I reached the pump shed, Vivian Klein was already standing near the canal with 2 board members, the security guard, and a contractor in a yellow vest. The first dump truck waited with its bed raised halfway, full of pale fill dirt. I had Marin's green-handled shovel in my right hand and my phone in my left. Vivian saw both. "Mr. Rowan," she said, "this is your final notice. Do not interfere with approved work." I stopped by the head gate. "This canal is State Lateral 14B, I said. "You received certified notice yesterday." She looked toward the contractor. "Proceed." But he did not move right away. The sun had not climbed high yet, and the canal mud still held last night's coolness. Near the metal frame, where one tire had scraped the bank, the brass tag showed clean for the first time in years. State Lateral 14B. The board treasurer, a narrow man named Paul, bent slightly and squinted at it. "Vivian," he said quietly. Why does an abandoned ditch have a state tagged?" For 1 second, she hesitated. I saw it. Her clipboard lowered. Her jaw moved like she had started to answer and swallowed the words instead. Behind her. The contractor looked from the tag to the truck, waiting for somebody else to own the decision. That was the moment she could have stopped. She could have called the state engineer. She could have delayed the inspection. She could have told the residents there was a question about the records. Instead, she straightened her blazer. "Because old farmers put tags on everything," she said. "Cover it." Paul stepped back. The truck bed lifted. The first load of dirt slid down with a heavy, rushing sound, hitting water, mud, grass, and stone all at once. The canal disappeared under dust. The little current that had been moving 10 minutes earlier folded back on itself and stopped. I did not move. That was my flaw. I know it now. I had believed the warning letter would be enough. I had believed the photographs, the certified receipt, The sentence in the state record would make reasonable people pause. Marin would have walked straight to that truck and stood where no driver could pretend not to see her. I stood on the bank and documented. The second truck dumped over the head gate. Then one contractor picked up Marin's shovel from beside the pump shed. "Leave that," I said. Vivian turned. "That junk is part of the nuisance condition." He tossed it onto a debris pile with broken roots, wet mud, and torn survey ribbon. The blade struck a rock and gave that flat, familiar ring. For the first time all morning, my hand shook. Vivian smiled toward the neighbors. There. Now the entrance can finally look like a neighborhood. I took one more photo, then I called Mara Ellison. When she answered, I said only 5 words. "They impaired delivery this morning." Mara Ellison arrived at 11:36 in a white state truck with dust on the doors and a blue seal on the side. By then, half the neighborhood had gathered near the new entrance sign. Some came because Vivian had told them the project was finally moving forward. Some came because trucks always draw people in a small place. A few stood far enough back to pretend they were only walking dogs. The canal was gone under a strip of pale dirt. Only the upper corner of the head gate still showed. Vivian stepped toward Mara before I could... "Good morning," she said brightly. "I'm Vivian Klein, HOA president. I'm sure Mr. Rowan has created some confusion, but this is a permitted beautification improvement." Mara did not shake her hand right away. She looked at the filled canal, then at the trucks, then at the mud line where water had backed up and spread sideways into the grass. "What time was material placed?" she asked. Vivian blinked. "I'm sorry. What time was fill placed in this conveyance?" "It's not a conveyance," Vivian said. "It's an obsolete drainage feature." Mara turned to me. "Mr. Rowan." I handed her a folder. Not thick. Just enough. Photographs, certified receipts, Vivian's letter, the work order photo, and the old map copy Mara had given me permission to duplicate. She reviewed them on the hood of her truck. Nobody spoke for a minute. That silence did more than I could have done with shouting. Mara walked down to the head gate and crouched near the part of the brass tag still visible above the fill. Dust had packed into the stamped numbers, so she took a small brush from her vest pocket and cleared it gently. "State lateral 14. Paul, the treasurer, saw it from 10 feet away." His face changed first, then Glenn Harper's. Then 2 of the newer homeowners stepped closer. Their phones lowered now, not recording, just looking. Mara stood. "This is not abandoned drainage," she said. "This is a state-recognized irrigation lateral." Vivian laughed once, too quick. "With respect, we have HOA authority over the entrance corridor." Mara looked at her. "That's not how water law works." The words landed flat and heavy. Vivian's smile thinned. "We were told this was non-conforming and inactive." "By whom?" "Our project consultant." "Do you have written approval from the state engineer authorizing fill, relocation, or impairment of lateral 14B? Vivian looked at her clipboard, then at the contractor, then at Paul. "No one helped her?" Mara asked again, slower. "Where is the written state engineer approval allowing your board to fill lateral 14B? Vivian's lips parted, but all that came out was air. The contractor removed his hard hat. "Behind me," Glenn muttered. "Good Lord." I did not turn around. I kept my eyes on the canal, on the small corner of brass still showing through the dirt. For 34 years, that tag had sat low and quiet where almost nobody noticed it. Now everybody was staring. Mara closed the folder and looked toward the unfinished entrance sign. "I need the full permit file," she said. Vivian swallowed. That was the first time I saw her understand that the dirt was not covering her problem. It was exposing it. Mara opened the permit file on the hood of her truck. Vivian stood across from her with both hands locked around the clipboard, the same clipboard she had used for weeks like it was a badge. Now it looked too thin to protect anybody. Residents gathered closer. The contractor stayed by his truck. Paul stood near the entrance sign, pale and silent. Glenn Harper leaned on the fence with his arms crossed, watching Vivian the way a man watches a gate he finally realizes has been hung crooked for years. Mara pulled out the amendment map first. "This is the recorded conveyance map for lateral 14B, she said. "It predates this subdivision." Vivian tried to interrupt. "Our legal consultant reviewed the entrance corridor." Mara did not raise her voice. "I'm not finished." That stopped her. Mara turned the page and placed one finger beneath the sentence I had read in the archive office. Then she read it aloud. "No private subdivision authority may obstruct, fill, relocate, or impair lateral 14B without written approval from the state engineer." No one moved. Not the board members. Not the contractor. Not Vivian. Even the diesel engine ticking behind us seemed to quiet down. Mara looked up. "Mrs. Klein, I'll ask one more time. Where is the written state engineer approval allowing your board to fill this lateral?" Vivian's lips pressed together. "We relied on professional guidance." "That is not an approval." "The canal appeared inactive." "That is not an approval." "It was interfering with a permitted community improvement." Mara closed the folder halfway. "That permit was conditioned on no disturbance to existing water conveyance infrastructure. This project file represents the ditch line as abandoned drainage. That representation is now in question." A woman from the newer houses spoke from behind Vivian. "You told us it was already cleared." Vivian turned sharply. It was cleared through the proper channels." "Which channels?" Paul asked. That was when the crowd shifted. Not loudly. No shouting. Just bodies turning, faces changing, people stepping away from the person they had stood behind all morning. Vivian saw it. So did I. For weeks, she had treated my quiet like surrender. Like if I did not perform anger in public, I must not have any strength behind me. But silence was never weakness. Sometimes silence is just a man waiting for the right document to be read by the right person. Mara removed a red stop work notice from her folder. "Effective immediately. All work within the lateral 14B corridor is suspended pending investigation. No additional fill. No grading. No removal of evidence. Contractor equipment stays clear of the canal bank." The contractor nodded fast. Vivian's voice sharpened. "This will cost the association thousands." Mara looked at the buried canal. "It may cost more if delivery was impaired." Then Glenn spoke. Low but clear. "Caleb asked you for the approval number last week." Several neighbors looked at me. I said nothing. I did not need to. Vivian had spent all morning burying a canal. Now the whole neighborhood could see she had buried the truth with it. The stop work order stayed taped to the HOA entrance sign for 12 days. Red paper, black letters, plain language. No grading, no fill, no disturbance. People drove slower past it than they had ever driven past my canal. 2 days after Mara's inspection, a restoration crew arrived under state supervision. Not Vivian's contractor, not the HOA's preferred crew. A licensed water conveyance contractor out of Baker City with a foreman who knew enough to ask where the original grade had been before he touched a machine. I stood by the fence while they worked. They removed the fill-in layers, pale dirt first, then compacted mud. Then the torn grass and broken roots the trucks had pushed into the channel. Every bucket lifted out made the canal look less like damage and more like memory returning to shape. Mara came back with a survey rod and a file folder. "The restoration order is formal now," she told me. "Impairment of lateral 14B. Unauthorized fill. Permit conditions violated." I nodded. "What happens to their project?" "Suspended pending review." That was a careful answer. Government people give careful answers when the paper is still moving. But the consequences came anyway. The HOA fines against me were canceled in writing. The board's entrance corridor permit was suspended. The contractor received notice to preserve all records. Vivian was removed from permit communications after an emergency board meeting that lasted 3 hours and ended with people shouting about money, disclosure, and who had approved the phrase abandoned drainage in the application. I did not attend. Glenn told me about it later from the fence line. They asked her if the developer knew. He said, "What did she say?" She said the board relied on expert guidance. That's not an answer. No, Glenn said. It wasn't. A week later, the HOA treasurer came by with an envelope. Paul looked smaller without Vivian standing near him. He held the envelope in both hands. "This is reimbursement for the documented damage to the canal bank and pump access," he said. "There'll be more once the final invoice clears." I took it, but did not open it. "Thank you." He looked toward the pump shed, where Marin's shovel leaned against the wall, cleaned but still scratched from the debris pile. "I should have asked harder when I saw that tag," he said. I could have agreed. I could have made him stand there in the discomfort Vivian had created and he had helped carry. Instead, I said, "Most people see a ditch until somebody teaches them what it delivers." He nodded once and left. That evening, I washed the shovel again, even though it was already clean. Mud had worked into the seam where the blade met the handle. I used an old toothbrush and warm water, the way Marin used to clean seed trays on the back step. She would have spoken sooner. That was the truth I had to sit with. I had trusted records so much that I let people get close enough to hurt what mattered. The canal was being restored. Vivian was losing power. The permit was shut down. But when the last truck left and the dust settled over Juniper Bend, I still heard that shovel hit the rock. First water returned on a Thursday. Not much at first, just a thin silver line slipping under the restored headgate, touching the gravel, finding the old low places like it had been away on business and knew exactly where to set its suitcase down. I stood beside the canal with Marin's green-handled shovel in my hand. The state marker had been installed that morning. A square metal post, plain and practical, with black lettering that identified the corridor as lateral 14B. Protected conveyance. No unauthorized obstruction. Nothing poetic about it. I liked that. Some truths do not need decoration. The cottonwoods moved in a light wind. Their leaves made that dry, trembling sound they always made before the heat thickened. I stepped into the canal bed where the crew had left one small ridge of silt along the edge and used Marin's shovel to pull it back. The blade scraped gravel. That same flat ring came up from the bank. Only this time, it did not sound like damage. It sounded like work. I leaned on the handle for a moment and watched the water move around the place I had cleared. Slow, shallow, stubborn. Like most useful things out here, Vivian Klein resigned from the HOA board before the next monthly meeting. The entrance project stayed suspended. The new board sent a letter promising a full review of permit records, contractor communications, and developer involvement. That last part remained unfinished. Nobody ever clearly answered whether Vivian had acted alone or whether somebody behind the project had encouraged her to make the canal disappear before inspection. Maybe the records would show it. Maybe they would not. I had learned not every truth arrives at the same speed. But the canal was open. The water was legal. The shovel was back where it belonged. And nobody in Juniper Bend called it an obsolete ditch again. I used to think protecting land meant fighting every person who stepped wrong on it. Marin understood better. She knew some boundaries are strongest when they are maintained quietly, season after season, until the day someone mistakes patience for permission. That was Vivian's mistake. She thought old water could be buried because old people get tired of explaining themselves. But water remembers grade. Records remember people. And sometimes, the quietest thing on your property is the one thing powerful enough to stop a holy board in its tracks. Before you go, I'd like to ask you something. If someone came onto your property with official-looking papers, neighbors watching, and a board president telling everyone you were the problem, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up sooner, or waited for the records to speak if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a land dispute, a water rights issue, or just a neighbor who thought quiet meant weak? Tell me where you're watching from and what happened. And if stories like this matter to you, consider liking the video and subscribing. I tell these stories for people who still believe decency can win, even when it takes the long way around. One of the most valuable lessons life teaches us is that patience is not weakness. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice, it can be easy to believe that staying calm means giving up. But true strength is often found in quiet persistence. Doing the right thing when no one is watching, keeping your integrity when others lose theirs, and trusting that truth has a way of revealing itself in time. The people who leave the greatest impact are rarely the ones who shout the loudest. They are the ones who remain steady when life tests them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation where patience and perseverance eventually paid off? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about courage, justice, and quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe and join our community for more inspiring journeys.